The Spotlight, shining a light on podcasts and videos that have caught our attention.
Hi and welcome to The Spotlight. I'm Jen Spiker, and today I'm highlighting a recent conversation that was heard on Vision's weekend program, Real Faith. When Sarah David made a trip to Papua New Guinea in 2012, she learned about a woman who died shortly after giving birth because she didn't have access to quality healthcare. This inspired Sarah to get involved. On Real Faith, Eric Scatterbo spoke to Sarah, who shared about her first experience deep in the jungles of PNG.
The Spotlight with Jen Spiker.
And we would hear this like a drum beat. And we now know that it's the garamut, which is the big village drum. They usually have that near the church. And that's the way that they communicate. So they communicate to the next village to say that,
cool.
People are coming.
Yeah.
And so by the time we arrived at the village, the whole village was out to welcome us. And we had to step through these fronds, these palm fronds, and it was all quiet on the other side. So we stepped through, and then immediately the beat of the drum and the music and the singing started. And they were all dressed up.
Sounds like something out of a movie.
Oh, it was incredible. We were just... Oh my gosh, we were overwhelmed with their welcome. It was stinking hot. And we walked through the whole village with this music and the whole village, like just hundreds of people just walking on either side of us.
So you were the special guest.
We were the special guests.
Being treated royally.
We were. And we were told later, because the children were terrified of us. Little kids would, yes.
Why is that?
Because they'd never seen white people.
Oh.
They told us that the last time that white people had been there was over 10 years ago. So any child that was younger than that, they'd never seen a white person. So they were afraid of us.
Oh.
And there were just kids everywhere. There were just hundreds of little children everywhere that we looked. So we had this incredible welcome. It was overwhelming.
Now, at that point, are you thinking, this was hard work, but it was worth it?
I wasn't thinking it was worth it yet.
No, not yet. Not yet. Okay, I jumped the gun there a little bit. What were you thinking?
I was thinking, oh my goodness, what are they going to ask us to do? And look at all these people. You know, who am I to come and do anything? And that was confirmed the next morning. So the next morning in the church, we had our first session with the village birth attendants. And we thought, there'd be a few, but there were about 80. And there were all these women, and they were sitting there and they were looking at us. And we thought, okay, well, let's share stories. Mike suggested.
How many are in your party?
There were 3. So there was Mike, the pastor from Australia. There was me, and then there was a nursing friend of mine. So it was Lynn. Lynn was my nursing friend. So her and I, we were going to do the training with the village birth attendants. And then Mike and the Papua New Guinean pastor, Yabru, they were going to do some church leadership training.
And this is through an interpreter?
Yeah, so there was, in the beginning, we did have someone helping with interpreting, but eventually they said, no, my English was slow enough that they could understand.
Oh, okay.
So they speak either Tok Pigeon or English.
Oh, okay.
So that was really helpful. And so we thought, okay, well, let's share stories. So Lynn and I shared our birth stories.
Which obviously you had some.
That's right. And I think because I was able to share that I had a difficult 2 births and had needed a cesarean and I could have died, and it sort of opened the door for them to then share. And then we asked them to share their stories. And oh my goodness, there were just one story after another, and it was of women dying, of babies dying. And there were a lot of tears. And by the end of that, I just thought, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? I feel completely overwhelmed by these stories of tragedy, of trauma, of loss. And I remember just sending an arrow prayer up to God and, what do I do? And he just said, right, say a prayer. So I said to them, now I just feel that we've all shared a lot of stories of loss. How about we pray, and we pray for all the lives that have lost of mothers and children. And then we pray that today is the beginning of new beginnings. And I didn't know how prayer works in Melanesian culture then, but I started to pray. And then what happens is that they all pray together. And so there was this beautiful moment where there were all these women's voices going up to heaven. You really felt the presence of God there, because it was, in Revelation, it talks about our prayers being perfume and this offering going up to heaven. And for me, it was a sacred moment of God just hearing all these prayers for this death and loss and suffering.
Yeah.
And it was just beautiful. And then we got on with the training that we'd sort of prepared.
And then what did that do to your heart?
Well, even now, I feel really emotional, because it showed me that God was there, and it showed me that God had heard the cries of his people. And even every day after that, I had women come up to me and say, you are here because of our prayers, or God has heard our prayers, or you are an answer to our prayers. And so I had this real sense that God had called me to that place in response to the cries of his people. Yeah, Psalm 27. And so I knew that I couldn't leave without promising to come back again, and that I couldn't come back to Australia without planning to go back again. And so when I came back to Australia, I just knew that I had to do something. It wasn't just an exposure trip just to see, and write it down and tell the story. It was that God had called me to be that channel of his blessing and his work in that area. Yeah.
And is that how your ministry got started?
That's how it started. Yeah. On the plane coming back from that first trip, I began to share with Mike how I just felt. Well, actually the night before I left the village, I was sitting in the dark because there was no power. And this man was sitting behind me, and I remember this deep Papua New Guinean voice. And he said, "So, Sarah, what is your vision for midwifery in the Kerem?" So the Kerem is the name of the river in that area. And I remember thinking, don't promise anything. Don't promise anything you can't deliver on. So I said, Lord, help me. How do I respond to this man? And I just said to him, I can see that there are some things that as a midwife we can teach your village birth attendants, and I will go back to Australia and I will talk to people there and the church, and we will see what we can do, and I will come back again. And I had said that to him. And then on the plane coming back from Cairns, Mike was sitting next to me and he said to me, "So Sarah, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Mike, I just feel we have to start up something." And then I started to vomit, and I didn't stop vomiting.
What?
Until
that was not what I was expecting. What happened next?
I got food poisoning.
Oh.
And I was so sick that by the time I got back to Perth, I had to be admitted to hospital.
Oh, wow.
And I spent a couple of days in isolation. But it was actually what I needed, because the intense, the experience there, the stories of all these women of loss, the senses, the heat, the sounds, the sights, everything had been sensory overload. Like I had literally felt like I'd been plucked from Earth and taken to another planet. and experienced a life 200 years ago. You know,
like you went in a time machine or something.
it was in a time machine, a time warp. It was crazy.
But an overload to the senses, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So a little time to kind of refresh yourself.
Yes. Because of course my boys were still young. They were still at primary school.
Oh, yeah.
And my husband was hankering for me, to, assume my roles again. And I can just see that God he protected that time. He just gave me those 2 days in isolation in the hospital where nobody could come and see me. Just
to kind of digest everything you've been through.
Absolutely. And process.
Yeah.
What I'd done. Because when I left, I mean, the woman wailed. I mean, it was heart-wrenching.
Oh, wow.
They they wailed. And I knew that I couldn't forget them.
Yeah.
I could, don't forget us,
Wow.
So,
I mean, that's got to be heart-wrenching.
and so going back to the Mother Teresa verse, I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed. And what was I going to do as a midwife from Perth on the other side of Australia?
And you have a family, children, a husband, and yet you're being pulled by them.
Yeah.
What do you do?
And called by God.
Yeah.
Just knowing, having that deep knowing that everything up until then, every experience was for this moment.
On the Spotlight, we've been listening to part of a conversation between Eric Scatterbo and Sarah David on Real Faith. We'll hear more of this fascinating story next time, but if you want to hear the full series of interviews right now, you can by tapping the podcast tab in the Free Vision app. Just search for Real Faith and the 4 episodes titled Sarah David. If you have a favourite podcast or video series that you'd like to hear featured on the Spotlight, click Contact Us at vision.org.au and share the link. My name is Jen Spiker. Join me next time as I share the conclusion of the Real Faith conversation between Eric Scatterbo and Sarah David.
For more great podcasts and videos like the one featured today, check out vision.org.au or the Free Vision app.